Anyway, the Cobras did their run, and it was sensational. I mean, you've never heard, if you've never been in that situation or heard the firepower that they can lay down, it is horrific. It is just it's mind-boggling. And not only that, but because they fire 6,000 rounds a minute, you are literally watching the brass pouring out of the door, and it's so low to the ground that the brass is still hot and it's hitting you, and so you don't know whether you've been wounded, or or whether you're copping burns, a non-event in the greater scheme of things. It's nothing like walking into a mine incident where a jumping jack has just killed half a platoon and there are dead and wounded lying around groaning, and you're there, and you're trying to get people dusted off to things like that are just horrific. And by the way, I'm not just talking about the minute I land in Saigon, but to go to a large American base and find, for example, ghettos inside those bases with guys with a red bandana and the pink glasses and the long hair and smoking dope, and basically a no-go zone if you wanted to keep out of trouble, and that's getting pretty bad. That's getting pretty bad. When armies get to that state of disrepair.
Okay. All right. Could you tell us just about yourself, where you were born and the whole story?
Well, I was born in Germany, in a displaced persons camp in the US zone in 1948, 3 years after the war had ended.
All right, well, we'll get to Vietnam.
Yeah.
Tell us about when you arrived and what your very first impressions were.
Okay, it's not like a lot of flying, because you come in on you're coming in a Qantas aircraft. There were 707s at the time. The squadron's on board. It's been a wet flight all the way to Singapore. Everyone's been enjoying a beer or three. From Singapore onwards, it's dry, and because because Tan Son Nhut Airport at that time, Tan Son Nhut was essentially under military control with civilian traffic, but the military controllers could always override if they had missions to send out. So aircraft coming in are put into a very tight box formation, and you might find yourself, stacked in layers of 2,000 feet, and you're coming down, and finally you see Saigon, and you see Tan Son Nhut Airport, and when you get on the ground and you begin to look around at all the military machinery that's around you, and you're watching, Phantoms take off in flights of 4 at a time, and complete with belly line bombs and all the other paraphernalia, all the other bombs that they're carrying, and S4 take off, 4 more land, and are turned around and they're sent off again, and that's just part of it. The whole business, everything around you, you suddenly realise that you're part of something pretty damn big. Probably about as big as you're ever going to see in the military. And of course, at that time in March of '68, it was just the end of the Tet Offensive, and General Westmoreland, William Westmoreland, who was the commander, the American commander in Vietnam, had fought a fantastic campaign and had really given the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese quite a caning, which within a few months' time was turned around in the press, but that's another story. It doesn't matter. Militarily, it was a victory, and so arriving, just the fact that you came at that time, it was almost an ideal time. Maximum excitement. And I mean, within a few hours, you're transported from Saigon down south to Viet Cong province to Nui Dat, where the Australian Task Force was, and that's where your life's going to be for the foreseeable.
Describe your kind of the senses you were having as you arrived: your sight, your sound, your smell.
Overload. You know, if you talked about a male walking through the women's perfume area of Maya and being hit by one smell after another, but it's not just the senses, the heat, the oppressive humidity, the pervasive smell of the food, and the visual, just the visual effects of looking around and seeing American military might at its best for the first time. It's pretty sensational stuff.
What was it like to you? I mean, had you expected this?
I think the expectation was certainly there, but what other experiences can you have where you expect something, and yes, it's there, but you didn't know how? You know, just maybe going to an AFL final at the MCG. It's not until you get there. People have described the sound to you before. You know, they've told you about the way that the sound just rolls around the ground, and then all of a sudden you get there and you say, "Wow, it's true." You know, it's that kind of. It's just essential overload, I think, at first.
And was this from touchdown?
Yeah, I think pretty much. You know, it's not as though it sort of stays with you and lingers, and you know, pretty soon you're on the ground, you're talking to your mates. They're trying to organise aircraft to get you down to Australian aircraft to get you down to the hill, and you know, things normalise fairly quickly. You just realise that this is going to be this is going to be home. Not Saigon. And I spent very few days in my life in Saigon. You know, once you get down into Nui Dat, that's where you're going to be.
Was it strange being on a Qantas flight and getting there so quickly? I mean, compared to other wars.
Oh yeah.
Just describe that kind of feeling of being there within, I don't know how long.
Well, you've left Perth that morning, and that afternoon you're in a war zone. Like, I don't know how long it took for people to sail to Gallipoli. I believe the last sight of land was Albany in Western Australia, and I think that's where the dawn service ceremony might have even had its origins. But certainly it would have taken them you know, weeks rather than a day. Is that so surprising? if you've already flown a bit and you've done it and we're accustomed to air travel, then I guess it's not that much of a surprise, but yet it is, because Perth doesn't have F4s taking off in flights and bombs, gunships. Oh, as we were flying in, of course, I could see out the side of the 707 gunships doing runs, strikes along the city, along the river. Aircraft hitting targets around the city. That's that kind of, starts to make you. It grabs your attention.
And describe that kind of sense of going to an airport with this. You're in a 707. Describe kind of the airport scene and with this kind of flying in a Qantas jet kind of situation.
Well, of course, it is a military and civilian airport, so you've also it's the mixture of the foreign, the American, the Australian, and the locals. All kind of intermingling. It's I don't know. It's just a buzz. It's simply a buzz. It's a very dramatic way of saying you've arrived in the war.
Okay, and tell us about where you were taken from there. You told us before.
Well, Saigon would be something like 100 kilometres. I'm only guessing. It would not be more. It'd be less, if anything. Northwest of Phuoc Tuy province, or Nui Dat. Nui Dat is simply Nui just means hill in Vietnamese, and Dat is earth. So it's just Earth Hill. They've got just as good names as we name some of our places. That is where the Australian Task Force was, and at its height you had about 4,500 troops there, complete with an airfield big enough to take Hercules transport, nothing much bigger than that. And that's home. It's just one very big, in Australian terms, it's a pretty big military base.
Describe it for us. Arriving there, what did you see? What was it like?
Well, it's mostly around the strip itself, Luscombe Fields. You've got rubber plantation around that. You've got sufficient tentage, to accommodate all of the sort of people that need to be there. You can see the artillery batteries. You can see where the armour is. It's all going to be laid out in a defensive, strategic sort of a way, so that your infantry is going to be covering the perimeter, so that your armour is going to be close by. Your guns are going to be somewhere in the middle, and through all that you've got the little pimple of ground that is Nui Dat. It's not a big hill, and our squadron of 100 or so was on top of that hill. So it was called it. People called it SAS Hill sometimes, but that was just one of the names it had.
What were the other names?
I'll keep away from that one. And we had our own, like we had our own pad up there, a helicopter pad where patrols could be brought back in. But usually, if you went out, you went down to where there's a very large, what was called kangaroo pad, and that's where you could fit a very large number of helicopters to take battalions out on operations and so on.
So what was the brief for your role at this stage as an SAS?
Okay. If you took, look, I've never compared the geography, but let's just say, for example, Phuc Tuy Province. Okay, that's Australia's area of operations. Of course, we extended beyond it, but that's the main area that we have to look after. You're talking about probably the size of the built-up area of Canberra. Okay, not the entire ACT, but just roughly about that sort of size of land. So big, but not too big. At the same time, you can't simply leave your 4,500 people all stuck on one little hill, because if you have to move them from Belconnen down to Tuggeranong, or it's a jackhammer. It's a jackhammer. I'm sorry, you're not going to get away from it.
We're rolling again.
I mean, the whole point of the exercise is that you are there to make that particular province yours. Anything that enters it is going to be known and to be engaged. So you might have. Okay, let's just take Canberra as a, and we'll put Nui Dat in one of the northern suburbs. But all of a sudden, as aircraft pass over, as they do on daily, runs, as other people are reporting activity, the aircraft might just see fresh tracks. Other people might report digging. Other people might report. One way or another, you start to build up a picture. There might have been a battle in Ben Hoa Province or somewhere else where troops are, where opposition are retreating in your direction. What you've got to be able to do is to deploy forward from that, because you can't simply expect to keep resupplying people from that hill, right? The distances are too great. You've got to put them on the ground where the action is. So the reason, the primary reason for having an SAS squadron up there is so that they can be placed in a line across where all of this movement is taking place. In other words, guys, there's something happening there. What is it? So in you go, and hopefully you'll find out that it's a regiment of North Vietnamese Army on the retreat. Hopefully.
And how was your...
If you're really crazy, you hope it's a North Vietnamese regiment. So you'll lay patrols, sometimes alone, sometimes side by side, sometimes maybe three in a line or whatever. And the idea is for you then to patrol a certain area which is given to you. Anything that moves inside there is open game. Okay.
And how did the SAS role differ particularly from other Australian forces in this capacity?
Okay. Well, when you're going in as 5 people, and your role is reconnaissance, if you do find that evidence that, yes, those fresh tracks are people moving through there every day, and yes, the diggings are bunker systems being dug in, that's when you alert the task force. The task force commander makes a decision, and he says, "Okay, we'll put in a fire support base," and that means that he'll move perhaps up to a battalion of infantry with all supporting elements forward, so that the resupply, the logistics line, doesn't get too long. Hence, fire support base Coral, fire support base Balmoral, just to name 2 where huge battles took place during 1968. That kind of work didn't rely entirely on us, but it relied on us going out there. I mean, we can't take it on. You hope very, very keenly that you're not going to have to take it on. Yeah, but once you've found the evidence, then the point is to bring in the backup to take it on.
So describe a patrol for us. Describe maybe your first patrol.
Well, the first one. First one was interesting. Look, can we just talk generically, as a patrol, right?
Yep.
What you're going to do? You're going to get. You've already got indications that there's movement here, there's movement there, and in three or 4 days' time, you are going to be inserted into that area here. Okay, from that time on, you stop washing, you stop shaving, you stop using any kind of. You start to get a bit, you start to get a bit of stubble, and you start to smell a bit, and everyone knows you're going out. Now, you then go out and you do a fair bit of looking at the area yourself to make your own determinations about what direction. And I'm talking about visual reconnaissance. You'll do at least one fixed wing flight, usually only with the patrol commander and maybe his forward scout, or with a SIG, or with his 2IC. At the very least, you'll do another patrol, another aerial recce out of a helicopter, where all the guys are lying on the ground looking out. And at that point, you'll pick a spot where you decide that you want to go in, and you'll take photos of that. And it'll be blown up to at least the size of a decent painting, and that will be pinned on the wall in the briefing room, the spot where you want to go in. And you actually say, we want to go in under that tree. Right? So it's, we used to have a very good and interesting relationship with the chopper pilots. Now, when your preparations are all done and you're booted and spurred and got all your clobber on and you're ready to go, you'll be taken down to Kangaroo Pad. You'll do your briefing, and sitting outside are 5 helicopters to insert 1 5-man patrol. You feel pretty important. 2 of those helicopters are gunships. Quite often they used to be American. They're Cobras. They're there purely if you run into strife, okay? And then they'll be called on to give ground fire, to lay down fire, to hope that you can extract the patrol. 5 helicopters. So there's your 2 gunships. Now the the leader, his call sign, Albatross Lead. It was throughout my time, Albatross Lead. He's the guy that runs the whole shooting match. Now, he will brief, he'll say to the gunships, okay, you guys go and loiter over in this area here. We don't want you in sight unless you're needed. They might be 30 kilometres away and you're going 30 kilometres in the other direction. Then you will get into the front helicopter, which just, we'll give it a name, it's called the Slick. The patrol all gets into the Slick. Behind that is the one they call the Spare. If the Slick goes down, the Spare will come in and try and pick up whoever's left. Okay. Then you've got Albatross Lead. So the three of them will take off together. Now, as you get up to quite a bit of height where Albatross Lead, okay, remembering he's number 3, he can now see the spot where you want to go in. He knows exactly where you want to go in. He hasn't got a big map sitting in front of him. He's just watching it. He reaches what you call the gate. And the gate means that the Slick and the Spare both go straight down to treetop level. And from there on, Albatross Lead stays high and he just calls it. And so what you'd be hearing if you're listening to the pilot chat, by this time the patrol is now, they've turned and you're all almost out of the chopper, right? You've just got your backside sitting on the edge, you've got your feet on the struts. And the chopper is right in amongst the trees. He's just simply, all he's doing is trying to avoid every tree in sight and stay just above them, right? And so he's got no idea where the clearing is. The only way he can know is by the calls given to him from behind. And so Albatross leads from above saying, go left, steady, straight ahead, go right, steady, straight ahead. Your clearing is 500, 400, 300, 200, turn now. And as he does that, the chopper will do a huge bank into the tree, hopefully, near the tree. And you pour off, he comes back out. The Slick has already passed, the Spare has passed over his head. He pulls in behind the Spare. And the whole intention is that anybody close by has not actually seen or heard a change in they just hear 2 helicopters passing. It's a bit of wishful thinking, because that grinding turn that helicopter makes into the pad and then back out of the pad is, there's a considerable change in the sound. Consider this is the most huge difference. You've come out of a briefing room. The briefing is tense. You're trying your best to stay as relaxed as possible. You normally go in at last light. You've had just once again overload with all the noises that are going on around you, and all of a sudden, bang! After all of this swaying and and so on, you're into this pad, and before you know it, 2 helicopters are gone, and you're alone. And you just have to sort of get off that pad as quickly as you can, but then just stop and let your senses, let the adrenaline run down a bit and start listening, because there's no more noise, and you're not going to be talking to each other again, except in the slightest whispers. It's better than any thrill ride. or the best thrill ride you can get.
Did you enjoy it at all?
It's very exciting. It's extremely exciting. Yeah, my word. Yeah, yeah. If you didn't enjoy it, and I'm not sure that enjoy is the word, but if you couldn't handle that, then you wouldn't be there. You wouldn't be there. You're never going in to find the negative message. That is to say, they say, we don't think there's anything there, but why don't you go and have a look and see if there's nothing there? And you come back and you say, yep, you're right, there's nothing there. They're always going to send you where they think there is something. So, back in the back of your mind, you've got to keep the thought that you could be facing who knows what. It's just the unknown. Mm.
And what were you armed with?
It really depends on the job. It really depends on the job. If you're going in for a straight reconnaissance mission, you can be reasonably lightly armed. Some people might prefer a 7.62, the old SLR. Others might prefer M16s, Armalite style, 5.56 caliber weapons. But people, friends of mine have carried machine guns as personal weapons. 25 pounds of M60 just as a personal weapon. Mm. And that on top of, say, 80 to 85 pound pack, maybe 40 kilos of pack.
Filled with what?
Filled mainly with water and ammunition, because anything that's in your pack has to be dispensable. The stuff that has to keep you alive has got to be on your belt. So your belt's also very heavy in weight.
So what did you have in your waist?
Well, in the waist belt is everything that you might need for survival. If you have to cut and run, then you can't. You're not going to run very far or fast with a pack through jungle, especially. So you're going to have communications. You're going to have, and I'm talking about visual stuff, heliographs, and you're going to, on your webbing, the patrol commander at any rate will be carrying emergency radio equipment, an ERC-10. That's what used to be used in Vietnam days. It'll be more sophisticated by now, but generally speaking, you're still going to have lots of ammunition. You're going to have some food. You're going to have some water. It's as much as a waist belt can possibly carry, and that's about it. Plus the web yoke above it. These days you see them wearing nylon jackets, web nylon jackets with all sorts of pockets for all sorts of extras, but I'm talking back in the older days. As with 5 guys, you really don't have much of an opportunity to take on too much. You can try, and and ambushing was another valid role from time to time in the regiment, and quite an effective one.
Okay, tell us. Well, I'll just go on the helicopters again. Just tell us how you felt about their role.
Well, the fact is that the pilots, the RAF. It was a RAF asset then. The pilots of 9 Squadron, I think one of the reasons why we had such a terrific relationship is because we used to put them so much under the hammer. You know, we'd put them into as much danger as they were putting us. What I mean by that is that the places that we were going were dangerous enough, but if the enemy was there on the spot and nailed you as soon as you got on the ground, and that happened more often than I'd care to count, then they had to come back in and get you, and that took a lot. That took a lot. I mean, you know, in the case of say a rope extraction, we're talking now about no clearing or hardly any room to get. There's nowhere to set the helicopter down, so they drop ropes, and the patrol already has a Swiss seat and a carabiner through it, and they attach themselves to the ropes, and they're just taken up by the helicopter and taken away. Now, the main target is the helicopter. You get the helicopter and you've got everything. So you put yourself in the position of a helicopter pilot, hovering, while people down below are taking fire and scrambling to get themselves into, get these ropes on, and you've just got to sit there. And what the helicopter pilots call the pucker factor, as the rounds are sometimes passing through the floor of the helicopter. You know, you shoot that thing down, no one's going to get away. So the relationship was very tight, very, very, very close indeed, very, very close knit. It was just if you want to talk about bonding, you don't get any closer than that. You know, when people are prepared to put their lives on the line to that extent for you, there's really no way of saying thanks for that.
And describe how you'd be preparing in that helicopter. What were you doing? What were you thinking?
What was I thinking? Yeah, why did I do this? Well, look, by that time you're already, all your preparation is done, all your planning is done. You know exactly what you're going to do over the next X number of days. Failing something that will cut short your patrol. Hey, patrols have lasted 2 minutes. You know, so you already know mentally. You know mentally where you're going to move off that landing zone. You know exactly where you're going to stay the night. When you wake up, you know exactly what you're going to do. The plan's already there. You've not only planned it, you've rehearsed it. You're kitted up for everything that you possibly need to carry to lay ambushes at night time if you have to. You're essentially on the way in. You're a passenger until you get onto the LZ, and once you're there, then it's a matter of, am I here alone? Everyone's out there looking, but very quickly, you just got to get away from the scene, away from that scene, and somewhere where people can't come in. The sorts people have been caught straight, dead to rights on the ground. You land, they're there. And then it's just a case of, am I going to get out of here or not? But if you're in and the patrol's going well, well, then you move to wherever the action is. You move to where those known tracks are. You move to where you hear fire. You hear any small arms fire, or you hear noise. You hear voices. You move towards it. You're there. You're there to find them. If you find them in the hundreds, then it's a pretty good idea to keep as quiet as you can. But at the same time, you're observing. You're looking for all signs of, if these people have just come out of a battle somewhere, what are they like? Is their morale still? They still got their heads up, or are they sagging? Are they carrying dead? Are they carrying wounded? Are they what condition are their weapons in? What weapons are they? What patches are they? Are they a unit? Are they an identifiable unit? Who are they? What are they? What condition are they in? Do they look lead? Do they look demoralised? Just anything you can possibly capture, and you're not doing it by sitting there talking to each other. You're doing it individually. You're doing it very much individually. You're making your own mental and written notes, and you don't get to compare them till you're back out. And quite often, two people can look at the same action and see something quite different. So that's it's just part of it.
Well, talk us through then that arrival, basically hitting the ground, and talk us through what you do and how you operate.
Well, consider how much consider first of all that you hope that arrival has not been heard or observed. It's a pretty vain hope a lot of the time, but you hope it hasn't. You go in at last light. You go in with about, and I'm talking very generally now, because it wasn't always this way, or it wasn't that way every time. But you go in at last light because you know just how the adrenaline is going to be pumping through your system so wildly that within the hour you want to be laid up somewhere where you can rest, relax, get yourself back into a proper mental state where you're already starting, all the jungle noises that have gone on around you are now back to normal. Everything's sort of settled down, If a mortar round suddenly lands next to you, you might think, they might know where we are. That can be a bit scary. That's the sort of, there's worse than that's happened. But pretty soon you want to be in a spot where no one is going to come looking for you. In other words, you want to be in the dirtiest little hollow that you can possibly find, and somewhere that's noisy to come into if it's dry season, or somewhere that's just riddled with bugs and leeches, and somewhere where people are not happy to come chasing you. But they will, they can, and they have. If they're good and they're aggressive, you'll hear. And I haven't been in this situation, but patrols have had a line advancing towards them, and they're just firing every fifth guy. Just bang, 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 and they're tiger bashing, just like you'd hunt animals. And the patrol knows they've got to get out, and that can call for a night extraction. And that can be pretty hairy too. See, you've got to realise that with infantry, an SAS patrol of itself, if it finds 200 opposition, so what? We can't do anything about it. The only people who can do something about it are greater numbers than we've found. Infantry tactics generally rely on on a force of 3 to 1. In other words, a platoon, if you find a section of 10, you want 30 on your side to take that 10 out. If you find a company of 3 platoons, you want a battalion to take that out. 5 people can't take out very much at all. That's why all we are the eyes and the ears. And that's why when you hear SAS spouted these days as it's really defence on the cheap. It's defence on the cheap. Because without the proper support, you could be on the ground and saying, look, I'm sitting here and I'm watching a battalion of opposition. Get me 3 battalions on the ground now, or lay down enough air power or artillery to really demolish them or do them some real harm.
So tell us about getting from the drop-off point to the designated cover point. What would happen? You would simply move. Obviously, you'd move as quickly as the situation allows, and as quietly, and there's nothing much to that. Nothing much to that. Except that the point of the exercise is that quite often you can do more by standing still and listening and watching than you can by moving. A battalion doesn't have to worry too much about how much noise or how fast it moves. 500 guys can take on a considerable force. 5 people, on the other hand, have to be fairly careful about the way they do things, and you don't have to necessarily move. You can stand and hear others, and you can just stand and wait. And when you hear them, that's when you move. But that's going to happen in the morning when you're all awake, all the adrenaline's sort of out of the system. You're as relaxed as you're going to be. It's not always. This is what I'm describing. Is not a terrifying scenario by any stretch of the imagination. You would not be there. You would not be a member of that patrol if the regiment hadn't selected you to be the right sort of person who can handle that situation. So as I said before, put me in an armoured personnel carrier and I'm a dribbling mess. Stick me amongst a couple of hundred opposition with 5 of my mates, and I've got a grin on my face. Slightly idiotic, but it's there. It's just, yeah. Talk us through that first night after you've been dropped off. What would you do? How would you do it?
Morning, wake, probably, you just depending on what you've heard through the night. You may brew up. You may actually have a hot brew. But if you think there's people around you, something cold to eat, because you just got to. It really depends on your sense of what's around you. If you already feel comfortable that you can move a long distance that morning, you might want to get going as soon as the sun's up. Even before, you're already packing your traps and you're ready to move because you can, you're feeling comfortable with the ground. You stick to your plan, but only insofar as the opposition allows you to. The last thing you want is to have to be pulled out early. And the only way you're going to get pulled out early is if you get sprung. So what you do
what you do really depends on the situation. It's unlike, it's not like, you know, the game of football where the whistle's blown and you kick off by landing and so on, and then the opposition's got the ball and they're running towards you. It's not like that. Once you're in, the best laid plans can have to depend on the situation as all your senses tell you it is.
And how do you interact with each other to talk about this or to communicate these ideas?
If you're very, very close to each other, there'll be whispered conversation. But normally, if you want to, if you're on the move, I mean, you're constantly looking at each other anyway. But if someone wants just a tap on a wooden rifle butt is about as much as you would, you're certainly not going to give a little whistle. It's going to be noises that are in keeping with the surrounds.
And how would you move?
Well, let's see. A patrol of 5 is going to be moving at around about 5 metres apart. So you're only covering a quarter of the playing field of a rugby ground. Probably in this kind of, like one here, next one there, next one there, next one there, a forward scout through to the last guy. But there's very little difference, there's very little distance, rather, between the first and the last guy. This is where a lot of our things are a lot different than the battalions. This is why I have such respect for my fellow infantryers, because, they would have to mount gun pickets through the night, and that's after you've been out in the scrub for 40, 50 days, and you're still doing 2 hours on, 4 hours off, 2 hours on, 4 hours off on a gun through the night. We don't. We just find a rat hole to sleep in. 5 people. That's all you do. If you're having breakfast, you'll be sitting there with lunch, something to eat at night. You won't be facing outwards. I'll be looking over your shoulder, you'll be looking over mine. Because if we're turned the other way, we can't tell you, I can't tell you that there's something coming. So you've got to be, it's kind of this little inward circle.
And,
I tell you, if I may, you said before, what sort of funny things can happen. There was an area that we tried to get into, quite unsuccessfully, but we made 3 attempts to get into it. Our briefest period in there was 1 minute and 49 seconds. I think we set the record up to that time. We walked straight into a machine gun. It was a beauty. They had us dead to rights. But on that was the third and last attempt to get into that area. The time before, we actually lasted a little while. We got in, and we were down there this a stream, and because you're down near a watercourse, the trees are naturally bigger. Okay, the roots are deeper and so on. Well, we got picked up in the morning by a friendly ape, an orangutan or a gibbon or some such, and this thing just adopted us. And the silliness of the situation, as you're down below, moving at, sort of 100 yards in half an hour sometimes, And above you, you've got whoo, 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 swinging from tree to tree. You're thinking, you bloody idiot. For God's sakes, leave us alone. Anyway, he adopted us. He loved us for some reason. And after a while, you know, I mean, it didn't bother us because it's just jungle noises anyway, so it's not, there's no harm done. But we stopped for lunch. And he stopped too, and he was sitting in the tree. And he's looking down at us, and we're doing something boring like eating a cold can of whatever. So he decides to show off, and he's leaping around us from tree to tree. These great big swings, beautiful, arching away tree to tree. All of a sudden, he's let go of this tree, and as soon as he did, he realised, I'm not going to make that branch. And for about 30 feet, there was this horrendous, I screamed, thump. And there's these 5 guys with their cans and their weapons across their laps, all stand up, all looking for their little monkey mate. The monkey, orangutan, whatever he was, he got up, I swear, he walked over to the tree that he'd missed, grabbed it with both arms, and started beating his head against the tree, gibbering to himself all the while. And you could almost see, you know, you stupid, stupid monkey, you know, how old are you? You've made it to stage and you still can't grab the... And off he went. He wandered off. He was too embarrassed ever to look at us again.
Oh, that's a great story.
Well, I mean, you know, like it's not. That's what I say. You're on these patrols, and it's, of course, I mean, there's some people just went in 5 times and were hit on the LZ 5 out of 5. We had a patrol I can think of where they were just under such intense fire. The chopper landed, and the patrol commander was the man ultimately responsible. He was still firing as he was grabbing his patrol and throwing them on board, just, you know, making sure that every man got on board. And then as he turned to get on board, the helicopter was just starting to take off. He grabbed the strut, and the door gunner, who is actually held in by a belt, he reached down and grabbed him. And so there they took off with this guy just hanging onto a strut. I mean, you see it in the movies too, don't you? But I tell you what, when there's no chains, you know, holding you on, or no ropes holding you on, and there's just you holding yourself on and a door gunner hanging out of the chopper, it becomes a bit more dramatic. And yeah, some patrols were more blessed than others. Some just ran into a strife like you've never seen. You know, you wonder who they offended.
And how did you look? I mean, how did you disguise yourself and look for the information that you were gathering?
Essentially, you'd look for somewhere that you anticipated that people. Well, first of all, if it was daytime and you'd found a bunker system, you might just lie up for, you know, if you saw some movement in there, then clearly you'd lie up and spread yourself as far apart as was, you know, good discretion, where you could all have good views of whatever was going on, and you'd start making your notes. If you're lying up overnight, you could lie very, very close to a track, cover yourself over. Again, it depends. It varies from situation to situation.
What about an example of a patrol you were on? Maybe using an example of a patrol you were on with a track. Did you just describe what happened when you saw people?
Yeah, well, I mean, sometimes you would see, you know, you might lie there for hours on end, and three people walk past, and the weapons are on the shoulder, and the magazine's in the pocket, and they're just local hoons. They're not. They've got no training, no experience, no real skills. It's a non-event. You note it and you let them pass. Other times we've seen very large groups. I think about 180 was about the biggest that our patrol ever saw. Yeah, and that's when you've got to have your wits about you, you know, because they're going to be looking as well. And it's amazing how naked you can feel in a situation like that. You know, you can, just got to hold your nerve. That's all.
In that example, where were you? Do you remember where you were when that 180 people went past?
Well, I would have been on one flank or the other. Probably on the far side of the way they walked in.
Do you remember how you were hiding?
There was a reasonable enough distance, and I'm talking from here to that first wooden cabinet away there, which is about 5 metres from where the camera is, so that you can, you know, you're already under reasonable concealment, provided they don't have people moving in arrowhead formation or something, you know, like that, or moving long distances apart, a couple of platoons, you know, moving on either side of the track. You're probably in pretty good shape, but by that time, the die is cast. You know, you don't have to start. That's not a consideration any longer. You don't feel anything. You're just taking notes, because if you well, that's your job. Your job is not to start feeling nervous, although you will. At some point you will. At some point you certainly will. Yeah, it's not a good feeling. It's not a good feeling to be surrounded by that many people.
What's happening with your body at that stage?
Smells or sounds? Oh, look, I guess there's a lot in just trying to remain as calm as you possibly can. Deep breathing if you can, you know. I mean, long before you've ever gone out, you already make sure that even if you jump up and down with everything you've got on you, nothing's going to rattle. So, you know, so you've got nothing that's going to make a noise. You certainly hope you're not going to go into a coughing fit. But if you started thinking about that, you wouldn't. I mean, you just don't. It's not the way your mind's operating. It's hard to know. Hard to know. I mean, you know, there are more frightening situations than that. There are certainly more frightening situations that can occur than that.
How do you have your weapon?
At that point, certainly in a fire position, you don't want to have to move it to get into a fire position.
And how do you keep that concealed with you?
Well, you do that from the time that you move in to the area that you're going to lie up in. You're going to make sure that you've got an arc that covers from the person next to you, that you've got nothing in the way. You know, that there's not going to be any vines or anything that's going to make noise if you have to cover a person as he moves or whatever. You know. But essentially, lying still is. For example, there were people I know that who had a belief that if you stare at somebody, even if they're not, even if you haven't got eye contact, if you're staring at them, they will sense it. And so a lot of people would often just lie there in a kind of a looking from either top or just side peripheral vision. And I'm not saying this was taught or that this was an MO or anything like that, but there were people who had that kind of a call it a superstition, you know. And I think there's enough evidence. Some people will suddenly, you know, sense that someone's looking at me and they don't know why, but it's true, they are. Who knows? Everyone has their own little. Everyone has their own little quirks. That's all. That's all.
What about some of your own?
Hmm.
What about your own quirks?
I think I took that one on board about not staring at people. I sensed that there was something in that.
And when they would pass, how long would you wait, and what was it?
Well, if people had passed and you were on the second day of a 5-day job, and you felt that you were okay to move, then you'd stay in. There's no reason for you to come out. No reason at all. You might. I mean, obviously, you're in contact through Morse code with base. It was Morse mostly at that point. And so you're reporting all these movements as soon as they've occurred and they've passed you by. You're reporting numbers, direction, everything about them. There might be a decision made to lay down artillery on them, just to harass them. They wouldn't necessarily know that that was because someone had seen them.
How aware were? Do you feel that they were aware of your reconnaissance missions ever?
Oh yes, I do. Oh yes, I do feel that. Absolutely. Simply because of the terrain of the province. There were very few places where you could put a helicopter where it couldn't be observed, and if you had 3 hills and they could all take a compass bearing on where the chopper went in, you could easily triangulate the position of that chopper and therefore the position of the patrol. There's that part of it, and also because you could never take, if you're only 5, you can't take for granted. You cannot take for granted that those people are poorly trained or poorly equipped or have no experience. You've got to give credit to everything that you see, you know, and say, I don't just. You can't be cavalier about your movements or your thoughts. You know, just stick to the facts.
And when you were sleeping, would someone watch at all? Or?
No, not necessarily. Although I think it's probably pretty fair to say that heavy sleep was a rarity. Quite often you would just the last thing you'd ever do at night was to take off your pack, the very last act, because then at least you still had your belt, okay, if you had to run. So you might put your pack somewhere close by. You might just lean your rifle across you and put your back up against a tree, a nice comfortable tree, and sit there, so that you'd sleep. Eventually, you'd get some sleep. Occasionally, you might feel comfortable enough to actually sort of lie down and have a much longer and better doze, but it wasn't necessary.
I'm interested, seeing as we were just talking about it a little bit, in I guess it might be a bit of nitty gritty, but how you control things like if you had to cough, if you had to sneeze.
Yeah. I mean, obviously there are moments where it would be embarrassing and there are moments where it would make a difference. You can't control natural body functions like that. So you just hope it's not going to end up in something. I mean, there is no. If you're going to cough, you're going to have to cough. Just hope you can stick a rag down your throat and make it as silent as you humanly can. Yeah, it's a bit hard to say anything else about things like that. I guess if you detected it as some sort of a problem in yourself, that you only ever cough because it's a cough when too many people are close to you, then then you might go looking for another job.
I guess so.
I don't think there's no simple answer for that. You just hope nothing silly like that ever happens.
Just backtracking, just to something I heard before. You mentioned that there was one area that you kept trying to get into, and that the third time you were in, you were only in for a minute, such and such. Can you tell me what happened when you landed? Why you had to pull out?
Yeah, well, it was pretty. It was a pretty hairy insertion, actually. It was, see, there was a track that ran through the northwest of the province called the Firestone Trail. If you see enough pictures of Fuktree Province and enough maps and things, you'll see the trail. And the way they built it was simply by it wasn't surfaced or anything like that. It was simply the trees pushed down and then pushed the deadfall pushed to one side or to both sides. So what you had was a track that was probably let's say 4 meters. Yeah, on average. Then you had a lot of deadfall that went for another 10 metres on both sides, and then you had the jungle. Now, that deadfall was particularly difficult to get over, especially when you're starting to carry heavy weights and so on. I mean, 10 metres of logs and so on, okay? You're trying to get past those. What the Viet Cong did was that they built footpads along on the inside, just inside the tree line, so they could move quite happily to and fro along that. But anyway, that's a sort of a different part of the story. We decided that since we had tried to get in on in 2 different places, what we would try this time is we would use the Firestone Trail itself, because we said, look, it's so long that our chances of actually running into somebody there are quite negligible. And we were wrong. Now, as we leapt out of the helicopter and here, you've got to know your Hueys, you know, like the Hueys, the helicopter. The thwack, 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 thwack. He's really in rare, he's hardly getting enough air, you know, to keep the thing going, and actually sometimes the change of sound between the helicopter blade and listening to incoming fire, it took a bit of, you know, you weren't sure whether it was the blade or someone was shooting. So anyway, there's a couple of seconds of what the hell was that? But we had that 10 metres of ground to. We had our trail to cover, and then we had our 10 metres of ground before we were into the bush line. But there was this constant stream of fire coming in, and in fact there were tracer rounds burning out, you know, in the trees, and this type of stuff that made you realise that there was something more than yourself just there. And the thing I remember most about it was the coolness of our patrol commander, because he said he got onto Albatross lead straight away, and he said, Albatross lead, this is 2-2 patrol. They said, did any of your door gunners open fire on the insertion? And I thought, you moron! Sorry, Alan. I thought, of course no door gunners fired on the insertion. No one would. It just wouldn't happen. Anyway, Albatross lead did his run around and said no. And he said, okay, did any of the gunships open fire? I used a stronger word than moron. Sorry, Alan. Because by this time we were still taking incoming fire. But it was the tactical situation at the time. What the patrol commander was doing, he knew that if he called for an extraction straight away and we went back to Nui Dat, we would be under heavy scrutiny. They'd say, you know, where's your proof? Where's your evidence? And patrols were being pulled out too quickly. So all he was doing was just gathering every piece of information that he could get. And he said when we got the information back about the about the gunships, Alan said, "Well, in that case, you better come and get us, because it looks like we're taking ground fire." I thought, that's the boy. Got it, you know. I mean, we'd already talked. We knew we were taking ground fire. So the Albatross lead said, right, what do you want? And Alan said, okay. He said, give me the gunships. He said, and I want a run 25 metres to my front. Okay? Straight across and parallel to the trail. Now, long ago, when we were first learning about the Cobra and its miniguns, we learnt that with one burst of fire out of a Cobra's miniguns, it could cover the MCG. All right. Well, right now, we were about halfway towards the middle of we were right in the middle of what was, you know, of where the gunship could have damaged us, damaged the patrol, injured people in the patrol. But really, there was no other option. There was no other option. And with the logs and things, you know, it wasn't it wasn't that silly a move. So anyway, the Cobras did their run, and it was sensational. I mean, you've never heard, if you've never been in that situation or heard the firepower that they can lay down, it is horrific. It is just it's mind-boggling. And not only that, but because they fire 6,000 rounds a minute, you are literally watching the brass pouring out of the door, and it's so low to the ground that the brass is still hot and it's hitting you, and so you don't know whether you've been wounded or or whether you're copping you're copping burns. And anyway, Albatross Lead said, "How was that?" And Alan said, "Good." He said, "Bring him in 10 metres closer, and have the slick come right in, slick and the spare straight in behind him to pick us up." And this time the guy did another run, and I mean, by this time, I think we were a bit of a dribbling wreck. But again, when you've got no option, you don't. It's not something that you sort of sit there and dwell on. Besides, it all happens so quickly. So anyway, the second run was successful, and straight in behind him was the Australian pilot in the slick, and we scrambled out from under our logs and around our trees and crawled back into the helicopter. And as we were taking off, the pilot just sort of turned around and said, "Trouble, chaps?" And as we looked around, Albatross Lead had already called in fighter aircraft, fighter bombers, the F-4s. The Phantoms were already striking the target as we pulled back out. And what seemed like an eternity, in fact, turned out to be the shortest patrol up to that time that we'd ever had. So it was pretty interesting. But one of the things that I might just say as an adjunct to that is that one of the good things about being in a 5-man patrol was, because you had so much firepower that you could lay down on these people, it actually made it more interesting as a soldier, because it evened up the odds. It might have been just a handful of lone guys who happened to see us and took us on as a target of opportunity. We'll never know what was there. We'll never know what was there. But when there's only 5 of you, the odds are a bit more both ways. Does that make sense? Like, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to win every time. Anyway, that was the story of the short patrol.
That's a good comment, actually. Did you ever lose anyone on patrol?
Yes. When I was present, no. But we lost people. Yes. Yeah. It's all well documented and often in sad circumstances. At the same time, and given the comments that I was just making about some of the extractions that were made, I will never ever understand why we did not lose several entire patrols. Not just one entire patrol, but several. There's too many incidents that were far more difficult than the ones that I've just described. Far more difficult, where whole patrols should have been dead, but they weren't. And then when we did lose people, sometimes it was in circumstances where you think that was just fate. It should never have happened. So, Yeah. One of the things that an SAS patrol had to work out was whether if somebody was injured, seriously wounded or dead, whether you went in or whether you stayed with that person or whether you left him, and if you had to leave him, whether you'd leave him and come out. And that was a decision that each patrol had to arrive at quite separately. Nobody ever asked what the decision was. Everyone just had to go away in their little group of 5, sit down, have a little powwow about it, and make a decision. Because there's no right answer.
What was your patrol's decision?
To stay. That doesn't make it the right decision.
Was that a hard conclusion to come to?
No.
Were you ever in that situation?
Never came to that. Never came to that. No. But that's your mate. I'm glad it never did.
I want to talk about this more, but we need to press on. You got ill. When did that happen? And
About halfway through the tour, I was medevaced home.
when did the first symptoms of illness come up? And
When did the first?
symptoms.
I'd already had a bout of pneumonia, and that probably weakened my system. And then, but that wasn't the reason. I mean, I was evacuated because I had scrub typhus, and there were signs of other things in the body as well that were, you know, other little bugs and the like. And I looked through my records, my service records, and found that I was actually suffering anorexia. I was down to 9.5 stone at that point, which is about as light as I'd ever been in my life. You know, so that was. So I'd lost a lot of weight without even realising how sick I was getting. But I just, you know. They basically gave you a certain amount of time to get well, and if you couldn't get well, then they might as well get you back to Australia where you can recover and so on.
Were you still sort of in active duty while you had bits of pneumonia? Were you going out on patrol?
Yeah, hospital, out, back on patrol, back into hospital. You know, it just became a cycle that eventually, and once they picked up the tropical diseases, then there was no more question about it. Scrub typhus and something else that gets into your lungs, melioidosis or something. I know the word, I don't know what it is.
Was this frustrating?
Very. Yes. Frustrating, distressing actually. Distressing because, you know, your mates were going to be there for another half a year and you're leaving them. You know, and some of them have been wounded, some very seriously, some killed. It's leaving the job half done. Yeah, and you trained for so long and so hard to get there that, it was, Yep, frustration, distress, feeling as though you haven't really finished your job. Yeah.
You were halfway through a tour by then. So you'd spent a fair bit of time in Vietnam and seen quite a bit of action. What was your sort of feeling about the war at this point?
In '68, it was still pretty positive because it's mostly the troops that were going out into the field were doing the job and doing it well. I'm talking about across the board, a lot of the American units as well as the Australian units. They were winning the battle in the jungle. Another frustration. We were doing pretty well, yeah, in '68, definitely. Smashingly well? No. But it was okay. Look, it's actually, you see, it's pretty hard to tell when you're in that sort of a situation as we were up on Nui Dat, and the only time you'd leave it is to go into the bush to face the opposition, and then you know that your body count beats their body count. It may seem a poor way of counting victory and defeat, but hey, it's about all you've got. But you're like the Chinese say, a frog in a well. Your view of the world is about that narrow, and everything that you can see straight up. And so you don't really get much of a view of things. You don't get to see very much of the populace at large. I'm talking mostly about just straight out line soldiers. A lot of others got to see the population, and I did. Far more so on my second tour.
So you were medevaced back to Australia? Yep. Can you explain how the medevac sort of system works?
Okay. Well, yeah, you either had people who like if you were wounded, lost limbs, and people came back with some horrendous wounds. That was a CASEVAC. That was a casualty evacuation. They were taken by Hercules from Vietnam to Butterworth in Malaysia in the first instance, where there was a very good hospital at Butterworth, and from there, after a period, taken home on the first available flight and put into whatever level of care was needed to make them well again.
And where did you end up back in Australia?
Initially in Concord in Sydney, and eventually back in the West, back in the regiment.
How long were you back in Australia for?
Let's see, it was 68, 69, end of 69, I trained up, I started training up to go away again in 1970 with one squadron. And so I was back in the throes of the training cycle with the SAS regiment, and so it was at that time that an opportunity came along to learn the Vietnamese language. And after a good hard think about that, I thought, well, I've seen the war from the hill. and I know what it's like there, so I want to get outside of that. And so I while there were no promises made, because I didn't have, you don't hold much clout at my level, but I wanted to go and learn the language, provided I could go back with the training team, the advisors. And so in 1970 I went off to the RAF School of Languages at Point Cook, learned Vietnamese for a year, and 2 weeks after I'd finished the course I was back in Vietnam with the advisors.
Can you tell me what you'd heard about the AATTV? What, I guess, your experience with them was before you joined them?
Well, I mean, the team is the team was probably the well, not probably. They were easily the most experienced soldiers that Australia sent to Vietnam. I mean, broad experience, stretching back again back to World War II and all the campaigns in between. These were the people who were most able to train others. People who had been professional soldiers in some case for all of their adult lives, and who really did have something to pass on. A team that, amongst other things, picked up 4 Victoria Crosses. So it's, but there's a special reason for that, and I'm sure there are plenty of reasons. There are plenty of potential VC winners in the battalions, but it was a quirk of the honours, decorations and award system that no Victoria Cross could be awarded to anybody outside of the training team, because the training team were not regarded as line soldiers, they were regarded as advisors, and so the Queen allowed it to be that they could be awarded the Victoria Cross. And 4 of them were, 2 posthumously.
I'm just interested. Can you tell me more about your reasons for wanting to learn Vietnamese?
Yes, yeah. I think by the time that by the time I'd come home and really had time to soak in the experience and come to some sort of a sense of what it was that we were trying to do and what we might achieve, I really felt that if the war was going to be won, it was going to be won by the Vietnamese themselves, with minimal outside assistance. In other words, and this is the world according to GARP, I realise, but I felt that we certainly didn't need the commitment of 500,000 ground troops, which by the time I got back were there. You see, because the 500,000 ground troops that were there, the tooth to tail ratio was such that there were only 100,000 of those out in the field doing the fighting. The rest in the cities, doing, I'm sure in a lot of cases, very important work and valuable work and doing it with good conscience. But you also had an increasing black market. You had private soldiers that had the purchasing power of Vietnamese colonels. You had an armies, allies, who had the capacity to destroy a culture, an economy, to drive the Vietnamese people into something that they weren't. Drive their daughters into prostitution. The money spoke, and the money spoke in the cities. And so the people who were recruiting for the Viet Cong, let's just keep the North Vietnamese army out of the equation for the time being. The people who were recruiting didn't really even have to raise the subject of communism. Just on the basis of being a good nationalist Vietnamese, you could win enough of them over. Now, we were the ones who were supposed to be over there winning hearts and minds. And by the way, the Australians did it well. I mean, we came out of our hill either to fight or occasionally to rest in country or rest and recreation overseas. But we didn't allow locals to come into our camps to do our washing for us or to clean our boots. We didn't need. We did the job as professionals. And I think there were just too many mistakes being made. All those huge numbers of people who were destroying the underlying basis of everything that was good about the Vietnamese culture in the cities were not helping our cause. They were helping the Viet Cong recruiters, and to the point where I would quite happily say to you that if I were a Vietnamese in 1968, I would have been out in the bush fighting people like me. Simply because as a nationalist, I couldn't have stood watching the things that were happening. I'm not saying that the Vietnamese are squeaky clean and that they are wonderful and and that it was the rotten imperialist allied powers that destroyed the whole thing. Far from it. But I do think that we were just supporting the wrong people for the wrong reasons. And we needed less of that. We just needed people who were prepared to fight alongside the Vietnamese, die alongside them if need be, but be there, fight along. This is a long way of answering your question, why did I learn Vietnamese? Because I could see that the guys who were in the training team just did extraordinary things against, extraordinary odds. And when the Vietnamese saw them doing those things, it rallied them as well to fight for a cause, And you can't have people doing all of that side of it, and then on the other side have this much larger number undermining the basis of your reason for being there. So if they stayed, if things remained the same, the war was going to be lost, and there would be refugees come out of Vietnam in large numbers, most likely. And I guess somewhere deep down, I could just see, a repetition of what happened to my family. I didn't want to see that happen.
That's some pretty sort of insightful and full-on things to be thinking. Were you having a hard time, I guess, accepting some of these thoughts you were having?
They were my thoughts, and there was nothing I could do about them except act out what I felt. So it's a very good question. I mean, would I have liked to have changed, the world to my way of thinking? Yes, of course I would have liked to have seen all of those things, all those problems somehow, disappear, but that wasn't going to happen. So all I could do was was be there, and you know, you can at the end of the day you can only be responsible for your own actions, and I could only put myself into a position where I felt I could contribute the most.
Hence learning Vietnamese. Just when you can you just take me through? I know we've got a lot to cover, but just learning a language in a year. Were you adept to language, or it doesn't seem like an easy thing to do?
The Point Cook courses, the RAF School of Language is internationally acclaimed. I mean, it teaches, and rather at that time, it's a much changed organisation now, but the basis of it remains intact, and the courses I'm talking about are full on. Yeah, we're talking 8 hours a day, 5 days a week for a year. So by the time you come out of there, if you have any kind of talent at all for language, you should be able to do it pretty well. You should be able to do it pretty well. If you can cope with a tonal language, Vietnamese is a tonal language, but it's also phonetically written. So unlike the Chinese script, for example, or the Chinese language, Mandarin, for example, is tonal, 4 tones. It's the script that makes it difficult. The script is not in any way phonetic. If you had the phonetic and you could handle the tones, then it's a very logical language. It's a lot easier to handle in a way than I'm not saying it's a simple language, but it's a lot easier to handle than English, for example.
How would you have rated your level of language at the end of that year?
At the end of the year, at the end of the year, you really don't know where you are. You know, you don't even know whether they're teaching you Cambodian. You know, just as a practical joke. We used to say, you know, a mate and I, we used to say, oh, we'll get there and the first person we'll be talking to will be a Cambodian taxi driver with a hair lip. And but no, I think by the time you finish the course, you've got a nice cultured type of a language. You then have to convert it. You've got to get down to talking to ordinary people, and that doesn't mean you know now looking up all the swear words or whatever. It just means. See, we learnt the language of the North. The North Vietnamese is it's an Oxford English compared to, well, something different. If you wanted an English teacher, you would take the person who spoke well. Okay. When you get into country and you've had another year there and you're talking to ordinary people, that's when they start to teach you the language. The real language, the way it are spoke. You know, it's so by the time I came out of Vietnam the second time, my Vietnamese was pretty good. Hopelessly gone by now.
Did you get married in that time that you were here? Is that, am I right?
Yes. We were married in 1969. So if you can imagine, I've come home in August of '68 and married in March '69. So language course together through 1970. Not together, but we were still in Australia, and then end of '70 back to Vietnam.
Did your wife spend that year with you when you were doing the language course?
Yes.
when you first went on your first tour, you were engaged.
Yes.
Was it harder to go on a second tour and leave a wife behind?
Oh, heavens, yes. Heavens, yes. Because for her, hey, you marry, you leave home, right? You start your own home with your husband. She had to go home again. And she had to live in Melbourne. And she had to watch demonstrations up and down Burke Street where she worked. In many ways it was harder for her. She developed asthma in that year. It was tough. It was tough for her.
And aside from learning the language, was there any other kind of training taking place to be part of the AATTV?
Not in my case, as it turned out, nothing. But that's only because of the. It's not because I, had some prior knowledge. It was only that there was an increasing number of people being put into Phuoc Tuy province. I already knew the province. I was there for a particular job. The language skill was, there were things that otherwise I might have gone off if there was the time, but there wasn't. So no, really. But when you're learning language, you're also learning culture, and so that was the important thing, to have that under my belt.
Did you have any expectations or anticipation of what your role would be?
No, because if I'd looked into it, I might have found out, but I probably wouldn't have. I didn't realise the level of expansion that was happening in Phuoc Tuy province of the team. There was a much greater emphasis of people in Phuoc Tuy, whereas previously they'd been spread right from north to south of the country, from I-Corps right through into the Delta. The day I was posted, I had no idea where I was going or what I was going to do. No idea at all. Just the fact that I'd be in the team. Yeah, it was really exciting.
A bit daunting.
Oh, not with those guys. See, they're all second and third tour, and so many campaigns behind them. I mean, these were people who really had lessons to pass on to people on how to stay alive, and just terrific soldiers. Yeah, the best Australia had at the time. I was just at the tail end of them.
Can you tell me about that second trip to Saigon? Once you'd finished your time here and you were heading back, can you take me through what that trip was like compared to the first one?
The arrival? A very a sense of, whoops, we've lost it. From the minute I arrived, just a sense of, we've lost it. The military machine that was operating there in '68 when I arrived was in tatters. It just, you can see when armies are no longer in a state of high morale. You can see you can look at weapons that are rusting and people that are running around smoking dope and people that are doing this and that, and just thinking, wow, this is a gone goose. Mind you, it was 4 years before Saigon fell, but it just felt bad right from the start. Something ominous about it.
Did you what?
Well, you can. I think it. Maybe unless I was looking for something that I'd already made my mind up about, and I don't think I was. The conclusion that I'd come to is that we had been backing the wrong cause, and we were doing it the wrong way. Just seemed to be verified. In my mind, I felt there was verification. You've only got to look at the way that armies deploy, what state they wear their uniforms in, how they construct their bunkers, how their defences are set. There's ways of picking people. But by the time all the sandbags are leaking and things are being left in disarray and rust, and nobody really seems to care very much and by the way, I'm not just talking about the minute I land in Saigon, but to go to a large American base and find, for example, ghettos inside those bases with guys with a red bandana and the pink glasses and the long hair and smoking dope, and basically a no-go zone if you wanted to keep out of trouble, and that's getting pretty bad. That's getting pretty bad. When armies get to that state of disrepair.
What was causing this?
Just about everything that was wrong with Vietnam. Just about everything that was wrong with it. I mean, we not just the corrupt people that we were backing, but the fact that the ones in the cities, our own side, the Allies, and I won't sort of just single out Americans and say they were the only problem children. We didn't need that many. We did not need that many. We needed more in the tooth and less in the tail. As I said before, the fact that you had a conscript army to begin with. Hey, I mean, it's. You know enough about your Australian history. If you have to conscript forces to go to a war, it's not a good war. It's not a good war. If you can't get enough volunteers to go and fight your cause, you've got to wonder about the underlying cause. So, it was not looking all that promising when I arrived.
What did this do for, I guess, your morale, stepping off the plane?
Well, the Von Trapp family did not sing "The Hills Are Alive" with the Sound of Music. But I mean, no. In the first instance, it was kind of a, whoa! This isn't the place I saw last time. These are not the troops I saw last time. In the beginning, it's just this thought goes through your mind that this no longer looks like a winning cause. It still took a long time before Saigon fell. But before my tour had finished, the 4,500 Australian troops that were on that hill were withdrawn, and there were 72 of us left in that province. That was in September of '71, and so the Australians stayed on for a little while after that too. So it was only training team and a few other elements that stayed on. and that's not, I'm not trying to beef up team here, but yeah, little by little, you know, it was disappearing. I think by and large the Vietnamese held us in fairly high esteem because of the way we kept very much to ourselves, did our job, did it professionally. You know, I think if Australia looks back and talks to some of the field commanders from the Vietnamese side, they'd realise that Australians were perhaps a lot better received over there than they were back here. But anyway, that's another story. Yeah.
So where was the headquarters for the training team? Where were you based?
In our case, we had now withdrawn. There were a couple of places. There was the Jungle Warfare Training Centre, and there was Van Kep, which was down near the provincial capital of Baria, and then there was another area set up where we were training Cambodians. Mind you, I mean that withdrawal only took place at the very end of my tour. You know, by and large, the little teams that stayed with Vietnamisation was the big word. Everything was being handed over to the Viets themselves, and so that was what our effort was directed towards. That is to say, you know, let them now take over the burden, carry the load. We've been at this for a long time, and it doesn't appear to be working. So give it over. And from their side, the Viets tried very hard, but in a lot of cases they tried to also take too much. It was a matter of pride too. You see, within Phuoc Tuy province, the training team members who were in I Corps, right up on the demilitarised zone, these were the guys that saw battles, the likes of which were also seen in Korea and in World War II. Pitched battles, tanks fighting each other across the line and so on. They saw it. They saw some big numbers. That's where I Corps, 2 Corps, as you went down the line, that's where most of the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, or the ARVN, were deployed. Australians, generally speaking, the ones who worked in Phuoc Tuy, who think they saw ARVN soldiers, generally only saw what were called regional or popular forces. And that's a very different kettle of fish. Is a brief explanation worthwhile? Okay, what happens is, if you join the popular forces, it means that you operate inside your province, but you don't have to leave your own district. Let's just call a district the size of a suburb. You're only going to do your own suburb. You'll be the poorest paid of all the soldiers, okay? But you'll never have to leave close to home. That's popular forces. Regional forces, you can cover all the districts within a province. Now, it led to a bit of an issue. The issue was that some people said, I want to join the popular forces because if I'm defending my household, I want to defend it. I don't want anyone else to defend it. They were committed and they meant it. Regional forces, the same. Much lower paid than the ARVN, but they wanted to stay and defend their own property, if you like. At the same time, there were people who were much more ambivalent about the war, and who were either moonlighting with the VC, or who were agents working for the VC, or who really didn't care for the war, but they didn't want to leave home at all. They didn't care to defend it, but they didn't want to leave it. So you had these two sides, one full of commitment, and mixed in with a whole bunch who couldn't have cared less. Very hard to get any kind of a cohesive force out of people like that. So that made the job of the advisor very, very difficult.
While we're talking about the people, how motivated were they politically, or by the? I mean, I guess what was their motivation for fighting?
You'd really have to wonder. Personal experience was going to be a big part of it. Maybe their family had been murdered by the Viet Cong. The Viet Cong were well and truly into terror tactics. If they wanted to recruit by terror, they would do it. Fortunately for them, the Allies made it easy for them to recruit just on nationalist grounds. The word communism didn't have to really raise its head. It was easy enough to just say, look at what these people are doing to your economy. Look at what they're doing to your families. Look what they're doing to you, and on and on. And as a nationalist Vietnamese, you could be taken in by that. On the other hand, if they had been recruited, if the family had been recruited by terrorist tactics, or if the family had a history of opposition to the Viet Cong and to the North Vietnamese, and this came particularly with the Catholics who came out after the fall, after the French ended, after Dien Bien Phu fell in 1954, and the French essentially withdrew from the war till the Americans took over. A lot of Catholics escaped across the border, and they were simply by bent of their religion very, very much opposed to the cause of the North. It's a melting pot of ideologies and motives, and very, very complex, very, very complex. Not an easy one to sort out.
How, within the province, were a lot of the locals really well educated about what the different political situations were, or? Yes.
Oh, yeah. Let's. Yeah, absolutely. To as great or to as great an extent as the average Australian might be, to as great an extent as any person in any country might be, depending on their inclinations, their education, and so on, except that they were intricately involved. They were there. They were there in the war zone. They couldn't extricate themselves from it, so they had to have a position. Whether they actually articulated that position out aloud, well, that's another issue. I mean, a lot of the time it's much easier to just pull your head in if you oppose something, especially when you know that those around you are just as likely to do you some damage. Yeah. So, but look, politicised, yes. I mean, you don't find non-politicised people in war zones. I think that becomes fairly clear even in today's Iraq and what we see happening in Israel and so forth. Yeah.
To talk specifics again, can you describe what your exact job was with the training team?
Right. We had a dozen or so what we called mobile army training teams. They were dispersed around the province, groups again of around 4, 5, 6 in some cases, and they were co-located with Vietnamese regional and popular force units, from company through to battalion size. And they were the ones who were responsible to train those locals in Australian tactics, if you like, and just our methods. Try and imbue some of the things that we do successfully. Australians are good jungle fighters. And we had a good track record in Fuk Province and elsewhere. I mean, we had the scores on the board, and we have the methodology. I mean, the doctrine is good. It was sound. If you could pass it on to these people and train them in the methods, train them how to ambush, train them how to train them, for goodness sakes, just to seize control of the land. You don't, for example, fortress yourself away and let everyone else run around. You can only control the ground by knowing your patch, and that's what Australians did constantly, patrolling for extended periods. And when you find something, you do something about it. You don't walk away from it or run away from it. They're the kind of things that become very personal. It takes a good team of good teachers, and people who will be there beside that Vietnamese company or battalion when trouble strikes. We had an incident that occurred, and of course my role as an interpreter was in the first instance to be the interpreter for the person who headed all of those mats. So I spent a lot of time with him, and we would drive together to wherever wherever we were needed. And we had an incident one day where we got a sudden call from 302 Battalion, down near the Long Highs. An urgent call saying, the battalion's on its way out, and we don't know where they're going. And the boss said, quick, let's go. So we leapt into this Land Rover and roared down to the scene. And as we did, we could see the forward company moving up the line. No Australians with them. They didn't tell the team where they were going. And so, I mean, it was chaotic. We had to find out, what are they doing? Where are they going? So the boss said, find me the company commander. So I hopped out grabbed the first soldier and said, "Dai doi chonga dao, where's the company commander?" And he looked at me, and then he looked past me to see who'd spoken Vietnamese, and I repeated it, and he turned to his mate and said, "He just talked to me in Vietnamese." And his mate said, "No, he didn't." And I said, "Yes, I did. I asked him where the company commander is." Meanwhile, my boss is over my shoulder saying, "Where's the company commander?" Well, it doesn't work that way in Vietnam. Before we'd finished, we had to go through, are you married? How many children do you have? How old are you? You know, it's a cultural thing. And the boss is tearing his hair out because all the battalion's still moving on. We still don't know why the MAT team isn't with them. And here am I involved in this ridiculous conversation saying to the boss, "For God's sake, will you sit over there on that rock, till I sort this out? I thought you could speak this language." Do you know what had happened? The MAT team had this beautiful little dog, lovely little brown dog, and the company, the battalion, the guys in the battalion, the Vietnamese were feeding it and feeding it and feeding it and feeding it. And one day they went out to look for their dog, and the dog was gone. And they joined the dots, and a little altercation took place. A cultural thing. Vietnamese eat dog. Our guys had one of the ingredients for the recipe. But they're the sort of, that's so petty and peripheral, but it's the kind of things that happen in war situations. Like you might, I can dismiss that as being, a non-event in the greater scheme of things. It's nothing like walking into a mine incident where a jumping jack has just killed half a platoon and there are dead and wounded lying around groaning, and you're there and you're and you're trying to get people dusted off to things like that are just horrific. But all of those things add up to a bigger picture of what war is about, I guess, and so that was just another one of those little snippets.
Just some questions that I've got coming out of that. Was there an Australian team with every movement of the Vietnamese forces?
No. No, sad to say. I mean, I wish there had been. I wish we had more assets that we could have deployed with them, but again, because they knew Vietnamization meant that we were going home, and pride was taking over more and more. They wanted to do all of these things themselves. For example, one night they. A company, no, it was only a platoon-sized ambush, but they went and laid an ambush, and I was, their own interpreter had gone sick, and so I would often be called in to go out with whoever was going out. But they decided that they wanted to do this all themselves because we'd already taught them the lessons of how to run an ambush. And of course we implored, we begged, we just said, please, 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 the lessons haven't been brought home well enough yet. We have to now go out with you and confirm that you've learnt the lessons. No, you don't. You stay, we're going. And it went horribly wrong. Horribly wrong. It was a hideously stupid plan that they formulated, and people died, and it was just so, you know, it was a very difficult time, very difficult time. But what could you do? They knew we were going home, you know. Yeah, sad days.
How did you feel about going home and leaving them?
I guess part of me just said, look, you know, cut your losses. It's a lost cause, and even if the South wins, it's the wrong side. You know, neither side was going to be the right side to win. On the other hand, I still have a letter when after the Australian pullout, and then another series of countries put together a force to go in there. Canada was one of them, and I wrote a letter to the Canadians, to the Canadian Embassy in Canberra, to the Defence Attaché, explaining my experience, both as a soldier and with the language, and offering my services to go back with the Canadians. I was pretty committed to it, pretty committed to seeing it through. Anyway, that didn't work.
Did this I don't quite know how to phrase this. The shock that you mentioned when this Vietnamese man realised that you spoke Vietnamese.
Not uncommon. Not uncommon. I mean, the average peasant would have no expectation that you could speak Vietnamese. None at all.
But the fact that you could, how did this affect your relationship with them?
Oh, it was wonderful. It was wonderful, because they could convey their real frustration. They finally had somebody who could explain why they were having problems. You know, both sides. It's something that a lot of the Vietnamese interpreters felt they couldn't do, either through face, or here are the Australians helping us and I'm about to say something abusive to them. Well, I could. You know, they could use me as the medium to do that, and it was not an issue. So it was a very good position to be in from that point of view. But you do. There's also a point at which you perhaps get a little bit more. It becomes a little bit more personal to you than it otherwise would. You know, you just feel a bit deeper for them, so the sense of loss is might have been, but that's just me. That's me as an individual. Others might not have felt the same at all. You know, once you get to learn the language, and you have an understanding of the culture, you can no longer, a lot of the time, dislike the person, because all of a sudden his motives are clear. And it's probably not a very good answer to your question.
How did you deal with, I guess emotionally, with some of the loss and also horrors that you were seeing?
Suppress it. It's the only thing you can do. I mean, it's long lost now. It's long lost now, and I don't run around saying, well, that's what I was thinking back in, in this year or that year, and I could see this coming, or I always felt that this was going. Oh, goodness sakes, you know, that's nonsense. I think probably suppression is the wrong word by now. You just have to leave it behind you. You just have to let go of it. You know, it's you know, sometimes when I see the faces, the young faces of the people that we had to leave behind, I'm dreadfully saddened by it. You know, terribly saddened by it. The ones who were committed, the ones who would have stood beside us, and we beside them. Yeah, that saddens me a lot. But it's all over. A long time ago.
Were there any particular, I guess, ways that things that came out of fighting and out of warfare, once you were developing this relationship with the people and with the culture, any aspects of that warfare that were particularly hard to deal with?
I think the fact that so many of the regional and the popular forces actually had their families living with them, so that when you saw them killed, you also saw the wife and the kids. The only thing I'd say about that, I mean, that's not peculiar to warfare. That's just common in death, and it's the kind of thing that police and paramedics and all the other services that deal in that kind of grief deal with every day. So it's not peculiar to war, but it's absolutely, it's just an integral part. And it's part of the wider human experience of war. I guess that's one aspect. Yeah, knowing that we were there 1 year at a time, but that was their home. You know, we could do 3 tours, but they were going to do 6, 12. They never went away. You know, there was nowhere to go until it was all over, and then of course the outpouring of the refugees began. But not that many escaped anyway, in overall terms of numbers.
Was there anything, I guess, starting to understand the Vietnamese people on a more cultural level, was there anything about them that really struck you that you liked? Like anything about a sense of humour or any...
They're very Australian with their sense of humour. It's very Australian. They love taking a rise out of you. They really. It's just the same way we do. You know, we like to just poke a bit of fun, and I mean fun. I'm not in any sarcastic way, but just poke a bit of fun at our friends and so on. And they're no different. I mean, they're just, and they do have a wonderful sense of humour. Very stoic people. You know, just so resilient and so tough. A lot of people saw them as lacking courage, and there are plenty of examples, but there are good reasons why a lot of them ran too. A hell of a lot of good reasons why a lot of them stood and fought as well. But all in all, that bond of humour was quite hilarious. And I could give you some examples of that, but even, for example, I'd arrived 2 days in the province on my second tour, and had to go in every day and listen to the plans for the day. So I'd be sitting amongst a group of Vietnamese officers listening to the provincial chief military. There was a provincial chief administrative and one military. And there was a chap there, a Vietnamese captain. The very first time he ever turned to speak to me, he had a speech impediment. Well, what did my mind go back to? My friend sitting in the classroom saying, Audie, the first guy that's ever going to talk to you in Vietnamese is going to be a Cambodian taxi driver with a hair lip. Not only that, because I was, I wasn't laughing, but it's because his mates were behind him with the rabbit's ears and, all this kind of stuff. But this fellow, for all his problems, he just toughed it out, and in fact he was quite a good friend in the end. But he never let it get the better of him. It's just that he didn't realise all his mates were around him, and that was one of the toughest days I've had, to sit looking at a person and trying desperately not to be amused by the wider situation and all the background.
Okay, I'll go back to a more kind of structural question about
Right.
The AATTV structure. Can you describe that for us?
Okay. Essentially, you had a headquarters in Saigon. That was run. Well, the first commander was a man called Colonel Ted Sarong, famous old warrior, now gone, but he was the one who was put in charge of our first commitment of forces into Vietnam. Australians, the Americans had advisors there for a number of years prior, reaching back to at least 1957. So by 1963, the first contingent of Australian advisors went in under Ted Sarong, and they worked for the US Military Assistance Command Vietnam, MACV. Now, there may be people who say, well, this guy really doesn't understand it. Believe me, this is just coming off the top of the head. I certainly wasn't back there as early as that, but essentially what it meant was that the logistics for the Australians in the team were covered by the Americans. Remembering that the Australian commitment was mostly within one province in 3 Corps, it required the Americans to supply us a lot of the uniforms that we wore, a lot of the sidearms that we carried, a lot of those things were issued by the Americans. And so essentially you had a structure where you had an independent AATTV, but whose umbrella of logistics was covered by the Americans, and in a lot of cases an American advisor and an Australian advisor would be working with the same unit. But now we're talking from top to bottom of the country. Okay, so that's a structure that lasted up to, I think the last of our guys came out end of 73, perhaps 74, early 74 at the latest.
And I know you're an interpreter, but just describe your exact kind of role within that structure?
Okay, you've got that dozen or so MAT teams, 5 here and there, working alongside 100 Vietnamese and teaching them things every day, and they're basically in an educational role. They're doing what instructors might be doing at the infantry centre if it were in the Australian Army. That structure in Phuoc Tuy required a headquarters too, and I was part of that headquarters element because the boss needed to be able to travel anywhere at any time and have an interpreter with him. And so I was that interpreter, but at the same time what would happen is that the Vietnamese interpreter that was with one of the mats could go ill, might be away somewhere else, and usually by the morning province conference I'd have a fair idea that by that afternoon I'd have my bags packed and I'd be heading off to some location or another to act as to take the part of the Vietnamese interpreter. So it was a very varied sort of a role, really, and I spent a lot of time out in the province alone, which again was very interesting because, remember, if we go right back to the beginnings, and I'm talking about 5 people being taken out into the jungle in 5, there are 5 helicopters involved in that insertion, and all of a sudden here's Muggins driving solo to places where I wouldn't have dreamt about going 3 years earlier. But by 71, the situation had probably changed sufficiently. There was enough security in the province to make it viable.
Did you feel exposed, though?
Oh yes. Oh yeah, definitely. I think if you'd have walked into Nui Dat and said to any of the soldiers there, listen, hop into that rover and drive it up to Bin Ba or Courtney Rubber, you would have got a pretty short answer.
So what was that like?
It was, it's what you do. It's what you do. Look, there were people who were up there doing things like that unarmed and as civilians. There were people who were doing that as war correspondents and photographers. There were, it was just taking. It was going from being amongst 4,500 Australians to being amongst a scattering of a handful of Australians all over the province, and just driving in between them and doing this and doing that. It probably took a little bit of getting used to, but once I was used to it, it didn't feel strange at all. In fact, it felt quite comfortable, particularly being able to speak the language. I think if I couldn't speak the language, I would have felt very vulnerable. As it was, exposed is probably a better expression. Of course, something could have gone horribly wrong. But then I wouldn't be here talking to you.
What about when you were driving along? Anything you'd do, or
go fast? No, that's not a. No, not really. Look, as a sole, one person. I mean, you're not driving at 4:30 in the morning or at 11 o'clock at night or anything. I mean, you're not taking you're not taking stupid, undue risks. That's the point. If there's a specific operational need for you to be doing what you're doing, that's fine. If you're doing something wild just to prove that I don't know what you'd be proving, but if you're doing it without purpose, then there'd be an element of stupidity in that.
How far would you go?
Well, in the end, curiously, I finished up. I sort of counted up the miles on the rover at the end, and no, we would have been in kilometres by then. That rover had pushed up over 6,000 kilometres in the year that I was there. I wouldn't have been the only driver, but certainly I would have knocked up about half those kilometres, and probably up to half of them alone. So people got to know the sight of me travelling around the place pretty well.
Was there anything you learnt because you knew the language that on your first tour you found was surprising about the Vietnamese people?
I think that when people are strange to you because you have no mutual language, because you don't really understand the culture, that there is a bit of a sense of, look, we can do it and we can do it better, and not that you necessarily look down on them or denigrate or are derogatory towards them, but once you learn their point of view, the level of respect rises greatly, most certainly.
And what kind of things would you see in this when you travelled that you hadn't seen before?
A lot of the good things that we had a chance to do were civil affairs projects. That was always good, being able to go into villages and bring in materials that have been begged, borrowed, bartered, stolen, however they were acquired, being able to bring those sort of things to them. Things that you would see that were different. I could sit down and I could go to Swan Mok, for example, the easternmost province of Phuoc Tri Province, the easternmost district, and sit down there, and I had a chat with an old guy one day, and he didn't pull too many punches. He just told me that we were the 9th occupying army he had seen in his province in his lifetime, and we were just the latest tow rags that were there. And I sized him up as probably being someone who that night would be out there, with a group of Viet Cong. I could be wrong. I could be jumping to a wild conclusion, but we had a pretty straight conversation, and he certainly had there was certainly no sense that he was in any way beholden to a foreign military presence being in his country.
What were some of the Vietnamese's? What would you say about the Vietnamese's relationship with the AATTV?
I think it was very good. I think most of the relationships where people were fighting beside each other See, this is what bonds. This is the crux of what bonds soldiers. You know, when you've walked out of a situation that you've been in together, and you've observed the actions of somebody else, and you might have thought, my God, you know, I wouldn't have done that. I don't think I'd have had what it took to do what I just saw that bloke do, you know. And it's when you see things like that, and it's just a mutual respect. So between soldiers, I think the relationship was very good, except for what I said before, that you had this dichotomy with the regional forces and the popular forces, or the rough puffs as they were colloquially known, where you had those who were truly committed, you know, to defending their household, and those who were truly committed to not going anywhere further than a draw cord from their own home, because they just didn't want to be fighting. There were people who were ready to fight and die for that, for the cause, and there were people who were ready to do quite the opposite. And I don't sit in judgment on either, but it doesn't make it easy to train or motivate a force that is divided.
And this was happening with was this paralleling the US forces at the time?
Oh, I can only guess at that and say yes. I can only guess at that. Yeah, for sure. Look, I was fortunate enough when I stayed on in the Air Force to my last posting was in Hawaii with the US Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific on his staff, and I must say it just gave me the most immense pleasure to see the way that the Americans had cleaned up their act. In other words, I had a 2-year view of them again from 87 to 89, and when I compared what was ultimately a large rabble and looked at the way that they'd cleaned up their drug problems and their all the things that made Vietnam so wrong, I thought, wow, you know, the Americans have finally pulled it all together again. But a lot of that goes to the root cause again is the same as the conscription problems that we had in Australia, and I'm very glad that I was fighting for a country where people could object.
How did the Australian forces compare, in your view? Tell us when you're rolling.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
You simply can't compare our commitment in total, apart from the 4,500 guys up on the hill. At any one time, you might have seen 6,000 Australians in country, and that's tri-service. You can't draw useful parallels between that and 500,000. It's a nonsense in a way. The people that we worked with, both in SAS and AATTV, I was fortunate enough to be able to work with a lot of their special forces. Some of those people saw actions the size of which Australians will never ever, apart perhaps from the guys that were at Long Tan. Actions like the ones that took place in fire sport bases, Coral, Balmoral. Apart from that, we wouldn't have seen the sorts of actions that some of the Americans that I know have been involved in. So it's very hard to find a basis for comparison. Yeah, it's a bit of it's a difficult question to answer. And I'd rather not even, I'd rather leave that. I just reiterate that it did my heart good to see how good they were when I saw them in that last couple of years of my service. It was a good way to go out.
How was the interaction that you had with the Americans?
Very good, very good. I knew I had the pleasure of knowing some of the best that I could have possibly worked with. People who a couple who come to mind. One in particular, he actually did his first tour of Vietnam in 1958, and I met him in 1971. So you can imagine. And in all those intervening years, he had been circulating around Southeast Asia somewhere or another. I mean, you don't buy that kind of. You're talking about a guy who started out as a buck private and finished as a highly decorated officer commissioned in the field. You don't buy that kind of experience, It's, but that's it. That's an individual. There are good, there are bad. I was lucky enough to know some of the better ones, and I wouldn't talk about any of the bad ones if I had seen them.
Did you see any examples of use of Agent Orange, or did you experience any of that yourself?
I know from our patrol maps that the areas that we worked in were the areas that were sprayed by Agent Orange. It's difficult. Sometimes I begin to wonder. I begin to contemplate some of the problems that I did bring home. Was that the root cause? Was that behind it? Can't come up with a definitive answer. So why pound your head trying to work it out? Yeah. But the wife Glad had a couple of miscarriages, and the kids were born with some minor defects and little things that were corrected by surgery. So that's just one that we've put on the back burner. We don't really sit down and dwell on it for too long. It's really been a long time to keep thinking about that. And I certainly wasn't in the situation that a lot of Australians were, where they were just absolutely soaked with the stuff, mixing it, for God's sakes, horrific. But then again, as kids growing up in Sydney, we used to chase the DDT trucks. Not much of a difference. The DDT trucks used to come down the road and spray the mozzies, and that was in Paddo there wasn't a lot to keep the kids active. So chasing a truck that was spraying something was a bit of fun. I can't smell the stuff, but if you put it in front of my nose now, I'd remember the smell.
So tell us about coming home.
Well, I had the I guess what I consider the fortunate experience of being with two units that had no conscripts. Neither the SAS nor the AATTV had conscripts. SAS took on national servicemen, provided they were prepared to sign on for an extra year because of the training that it took to build an SAS soldier. So you could say that everyone who went away with us was a volunteer. I served with conscripts in the battalions, but not overseas. Training team again, same thing. some were national servicemen who signed on. So I guess I never got to see the darker sides of the national service problem inside the army. But then again, the national servicemen did a lot of good for the army too. They really showed the army that it had to rethink a lot of its ways of dealing with people. But again, I feel that and I mean, it saddens me that Glad had it sort of rubbed in her nose by having all these marches up and down Burke Street. On the other hand, to fight for a country that allows conscientious objection and allows conscripts to object, I think is a country worth fighting for. And I don't think that wars that need conscripts are necessarily wars that are good.
What did you think about? What kind of emotions did you have when you heard about Gladys watching these marches?
Cool. How about it, when I knew that it actually, you know, that my being there had been the trigger for her now lifelong asthma. There was a real sense of, wow, you know, I mean, I'm guilty for inflicting this on another person. Yeah, but not a nice feeling. Not a nice feeling to think that someone else's trigger was your own commitment to continuing to go away. And then she might have begun to wonder, you know, by the time I was asking the Canadians whether I could go away with them, maybe she was beginning to think, my God, he doesn't want to stay home with me at all. I don't know. But no, it wasn't a nice feeling. It wasn't a nice feeling at all.
What did you think about the protesters?
About?
The protesters as individuals?
I thank God we live in a free country. Good luck to them. Absolute good luck to them. Yes. Yes.
Did you experience anything when you came back from people protesting? Or?
Yes, to a minor extent. You know, we were not that readily accepted within the RSL movement, but I can live with that. They also are Australians who had a debate internally within as to whether there should be commitment to that war. They might have had children who were going to be sent off, and that might not have pleased them. So, I mean, if someone felt that way, well, I mean, nothing that happened when I got home caused me to take it personally and say, well, you know, I'm right and you're wrong. It was simply a matter of saying, well, I did what I thought I had to do, and if you felt the other way, so be it. I wouldn't necessarily buy them a beer, but I don't walk away from the fact that they have the right.
Did you ever feel insulted?
Did I feel insulted?
Yeah, ever.
I feel insulted if people really didn't understand. I mean, if they and probably saddened a bit more. No. Look, I'll take that back. I'll just take that back. If a person hasn't if a person doesn't have, if they haven't thought through the process themselves and they haven't come to a conclusion, and they say something which is so rapidly spoken but so utterly wrong, I can't feel insulted by that. That would be a crazy reaction. I knew why I was there. I knew I was there. You know, my dad's last years were still in front of my eyes, and and the way that they'd lost everything by being refugees. No, I didn't feel insulted by anybody.
What about, did you see any of this before you went on your second tour? And did that affect you at all?
Only that moment of landing and thinking, oh good. I mean, up to the time I arrived there, I fully anticipated seeing what was still a potentially winnable war, and to in one snapshot suddenly see, whoa, you know. Their score is 110 and ours is 15, and it's the last quarter. I think we might have lost this one. Just to have that feeling, and then put it behind you and say, now do the best job you can. But just for that one moment, it felt like, yeah, this is. I'm going to carry on the Moldre tradition of being on the losing side.
How do you feel about the depiction of Vietnam in popular culture and movies and that like?
Don't watch it, don't like it. I take the pragmatic Asian view, you know, that you go and you do something, and if you've won, that's fine. If you've lost, forget it. Movies like Coming Home, dreadful. What a disgrace. You know, you don't air your dirty washing in the public. No. Mind you, I would have felt a hell of a lot better had the war been contained in Vietnam, but no, I'm not interested in watching reruns of how we lost the war, but we really did win it through actors like, you could name them, couldn't you? You know, they all went back and rescued friends and did marvellous things, and just, yeah. Hey, they didn't need 500,000 ground troops, did they? They just needed Rambo, and the whole thing would have been over. No, too much nonsense to even contemplate.
Back on your viewpoint of how did you come to view the Viet Cong yourself?
Well, I'll hark back to my first tour. You couldn't be complacent about any force at all. When you're 5, you can be taken out by 10. You can be taken out by 15. You know, and done in 5 minutes. Certainly, not all of them were well trained. Not all of them had experience. Not all of them were motivated to be there. The ones that were there under terrorist-style recruitment. But you couldn't be complacent about anybody. I mean, you had to look at each one and say, well, it's too few of us to to just say you're a bunch of rubbish. But certainly they were variable in their quality. Certainly they were variable. The experienced ones who had seen a lot of action, who were committed, were formidable. I mean, you only have to look at the action in Long Tan to see a couple of thousand people just throw themselves at the Australians and die. I mean, that's commitment. That's commitment. Mind you, it was a monumental failure of intelligence on their part. They, thinking they were attacking the task force, they were, 10, 12 kilometres at least further from the point where they thought they were. They had no idea. They had no idea, but they were ready to throw themselves into the battle nonetheless.
And this is a bit off track, but tell us what you have, what you did quickly after returning.
Of course, I went back to Point Cook and learnt Chinese. The Air Force. I then transferred to the Air Force, who sent me to Hong Kong University. A couple of years at Hong Kong University, finishing off a diploma in Chinese language. I came back. I taught Chinese and ran the Chinese department at different times over the next 4 years. Went on to do a 14-year Air Force career, culminating in 1990. Took those Asian languages into the Federal Police, worked for 5 years as an analyst with them, and finally was picked up by Foreign Affairs and Trade, who have lots of extremely fine linguists, but they often need people who are a bit greyer around the gills. The youth thing is very important. The youth and the age is very important to the Chinese, and so they're always happy to have someone with Chinese language skills who also had the grey hair.
Is there any
and no ears.
Are there any final aspects you want to talk about?
I think the coverage that we've done today has been extremely comprehensive. I wouldn't have thought of half of the questions that you have. So far be it from me to add one. And if we're going to do a rerun of it, then you better make me 30 years younger.
Yeah. Like, was it worth it, the war, do you think?
Wow. Look, when it begins in 1945, after all those years of French occupation, and they don't want the French back, but the French force themselves back. When you look at the way that heroin paid for a lot of the French commitment in Vietnam, when you look at the way the CIA came in, the American commitment began. I mean, really, it's just it is a series of blunders. There's no aim. There's no single. You don't. I mean, the first principle of war is selection and maintenance of the aim. It didn't happen. It was just. Was it worth it? That would be really hard to say. That'd be really hard to say. But at the time, the history and the beginnings of the Cold War and so on, the domino theories and all the other things that went along with it. There were people who were quite adamantly committed to it. There were others who could see the basic flaws and where it was all leading to. And I guess I was just a young kid who got involved at 17, knowing very, very little about it, and who came out a few years later knowing a bit more. Looking back, was it worth it? I just hope that some of the refugee families that came to Australia have come to terms with what's happened. Yeah.
I think we'll call it a day.